These are scenes from a 1914 film called Brute Force. It perfectly illustrates the old view of prehistoric man, of Neanderthals in particular. Hunched over, kind of simple-minded, and of course, battling dinosaurs. For a long time, Neanderthals had a bad reputation. In the 19th century, they were almost called Homo stupidus. In the 110 years since this film was released, though, our view of Neanderthals has changed significantly. They created sophisticated tools. They interbred with Homo sapiens. They were our ancestor. And dare I say, had rituals, which is just the most human characteristic of all. One of the best places to see evidence of Neanderthal symbolic thinking is Cueva des Cubierta in Spain, where archaeologists unearthed 35 skulls, all of horned animals, inside this one cave chamber. Let's take a look at this site, what was found, and the insights it provides into the minds of these ancient humans. Just want to take a moment here to thank the sponsor of today's video, MyHeritage, the #1 family history service. They have over 90 million users. They have access to 19 billion records. No one makes tracing your family history, tracing your origins, more accessible and easier than MyHeritage. But most importantly, it's fun. It's really fun. Let me show you what I've been doing. I've been working on my family tree for a little bit, but you can see there's a lot of names on here. Many I didn't know before using MyHeritage, so that's great. But as you can see, over some of these names, there are these little brown dots. That's called a record match. That's MyHeritage's system, and they've found matches. They found people and information connected to my family. What they found here is a record match from the 1911 census connected to my great-grandmother, Mabel, and it shows where they lived and the whole family at that time. What I really love, down on the bottom right there, my great-grandfather's signature. I love that in the same way I love archaeology. Seeing these little physical traces of people's lives, it brings it alive. It literally brings it alive to me. That's why I love archaeology. And I really love that it's got the address too. So you can kind of snoop around on Google Earth. It's the first thing I always do. I've been checking out these Victorian mansions up and around Manchester. If all of this interests you, go to the link in the description. You'll get a 14-day free trial. It's the best. Thanks to MyHeritage. Let's see what these Neanderthals are doing with these skulls. I wasn't really planning on making this video, but I mentioned this site in a cheeky little short. What's one of my favorite Neanderthal archaeological sites, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. And the mere suggestion that Neanderthals were participating in rituals it caused chaos in the comments. They couldn't just be eating them, lol. Not everything has to be a ritual. Why wouldn't they be eating them? They ate other parts. I grew up eating brains. But extra accent on that one. I grew up eating brains. When in doubt, ritual. Spoken like a true archaeologist. Oh, laugh. I didn't realize this idea was so controversial. Now, I know it's a bit of a meme, archaeologists and our love of ritual. I know. Maybe this is the issue. When I say something like ritual, maybe people are imagining a Neanderthal pope presiding over a congregation with a very clear and strict set of spiritual beliefs. Something very elaborate like that. That's not what I mean when I say a ritual. I'm imagining something more like, for you Americans, let's say Thanksgiving dinner. Each Thanksgiving, whenever it is, in November, Americans of all different backgrounds gather with their families. They're probably going to eat a turkey. They might have a kind of a specific set of side dishes. They might all sit around and watch a game of American football. That's a ritual. There's no way that's not a ritual. You're gathering together at a particular time to eat specific foods and do specific things because all of that has meaning. The day has meaning. The foods have meaning. It's symbolic. It might not be super elaborate. There's no Thanksgiving Pope. Well, maybe there is, I don't know. The president pardoning a turkey, doesn't he do that? Anyway, point is, these specific things happen in a specific day, including foods, because they have symbolic meaning. That's the level of ritual I'm going to argue for at Cueva des Cubierta, if I'm saying that correctly. Let's take a look at this site, because it's super interesting. Cueva des Cubierta sits on the edge of the Pinilla Reservoir in the Lozoya River Valley. It's about an hour's drive north of Madrid, right in the heart of Spain. It's a beautiful place, beautiful region. I actually met my wife in Madrid. A little bit of Stefan lore for you. Shout out to Spain. Absolutely lovely country. I love the people. Cueva des Cubierta translates as uncovered cave, and you can see why from these photos. It doesn't look like these archaeologists are excavating in a cave at all. But that's just because the roof of the cave has eroded away since Neanderthals lived there. Layer 3 of the cave is what we're interested in today. This layer dates to marine isotope stage 4, or the first half of marine isotope stage 3. Marine isotope stages are just a way of dividing sort of deep time between alternating warm and cold periods. We are able to tell if the Earth was in a warmer or a colder period based on oxygen levels in deep sea cores. I think this oxygen is actually coming from little mollusk shells, stuff like that. It's a very interesting way to divide time. In calendar years, though, this dates to maybe 74 to maybe, 53,000 years ago. This was a cooler time period, and this cooler period in Earth's geological history might have been caused by the Toba super eruption. Probably was. Obviously now, central Spain is a pretty scorchio place to be, but at the time the Neanderthals were living here, it was probably more steppe-like. A cold, dry, pretty open landscape. No human remains have been found in level 3, but despite that, it's pretty reasonable to assume Neanderthals were responsible for whatever happened there. We don't have evidence of Homo sapiens in Europe between 74 and 53,000 years ago. The earliest permanent occupation of the continent by Homo sapiens might have began around 47,000 years ago, based on finds in Eastern Europe. Remains of a Neanderthal child were also recovered from Cueva des Cubierta layer 2, from right above layer 3. You can tell it's a Neanderthal child because if you look here, it lacks a prominent chin. Doesn't have a big chin, these Neanderthals. You can kind of see it here. Yeah. This is another Neanderthal old man of La Chapelle. Look at how that just sweeps away there. Not big chin people, the Neanderthals. Layer 3 also contains lots of typical Neanderthal tools, Mousterian tools. So whatever was going on in layer 3, it's very, very likely that Neanderthals were responsible for it, and it's really funky. Some funky stuff was going down. The animal remains from layer 3 are what makes this site so special. All in all, 35 crania were recovered in an area just 27 meters squared, not a massive area. These were mostly crania without their lower jaws, and almost no teeth were found, which is kind of odd, considering how many skulls are there. You can't help but wonder what happened to the rest of these animals. Why? Basically, just the skulls. Strange. It's strange. It's strange. What's really interesting, though, is that all of these skulls belonged to horned animals. 28 of the skulls belonged to bison and auroch, stuff like that, bovines. 5 of the skulls were deer, all with their antlers still attached. And the last 2 were rhinos, which also have big horns. Okay, very big horns. I think you would have to admit, this is starting to get a little bit odd. 35 animals of different species, so this almost certainly is not one event, one moment of hunting. They're being processed somewhere else, and then just the skulls are being brought to this one location. That's starting to look a little bit symbolic. Lots of people commented on my last video on this, that this is just for food, this is just nutrition, they're eating brains, and you're absolutely right. I've eaten brains too, I've eaten pig brains, so I'm not judging them. They are definitely eating the brains of these animals. There's a lot of hammerstones that have been found nearby, sometimes right alongside the skulls. They're definitely bashing them open to get the brains. But you could do that when you were processing the rest of the animal, right? It doesn't have to be done at this one special location. Let's think again of that comparison with Thanksgiving.
I could go outside now and eat a turkey sandwich, and it basically would have no symbolic meaning to me whatsoever. I'm just doing it because I'm hungry. But a turkey eaten at Thanksgiving has an extra layer of symbolism to it. You're eating that specific food at that specific time and place for a reason. And again, with these skulls, why not just eat them where the rest of the animal is being processed? Why move them to this cave? It's getting odd. Come on, it's starting to get a little bit symbolic, guys. For those of you that are still skeptical, though, there's some even more evidence that things were getting a little bit funky. A little bit funky in the noggin for these Neanderthals. There's quite a lot of evidence of fire use in the cave. You can see here on the screen a blackened, hardened spot of earth where a little Neanderthal fire was. There's just a lot of evidence of fire use. Some of these skulls have been placed directly on top of where these fires were and where these burnt remains are. It's like they had a fire, put the skull on top of it. Is that symbolic? Maybe. I know the skeptical ones will say, shut up, Stefan. They're just cooking their brains. But what about this? What about this? One of the auroch skulls was placed directly over a flat rock, which isn't natural to the cave. The cave is a lot of limestone, I think. This rock was nice. I think it's a metamorphic rock. Often very nice patterns on it. Let's think about this chain of events. They hunted the animal, did whatever they did with it, brought the skull over to the cave with none of the other body parts, placed it on this nice flat rock, probably with a good, nice pattern, which they also had to bring to the cave. Neither the rock nor the auroch skull started in this cave, and they both ended up on top of each other. Is this what you would do? Just for subsistence? Just for calories? With no meaning behind it whatsoever? That's what you would do with your lunch? Doesn't seem likely to me. Doesn't seem likely. This is some sort of trophy room. It's almost like this is a skull cult for Neanderthals. I know that's quite a big statement, but it's a serious possibility. It's a very serious possibility. The authors of the paper briefly mention another couple of odd Neanderthal sites to bolster their case that there's some extra meaning going on here. At the Grotte de Prince in France, another accumulation of skulls was found. This time with more goats, I believe. More goats. Problem with this site, though, is that I think it was excavated in the early 1900s. I think around 1905. The paper on it was published in 1906, so certainly before then. When a site was excavated so long ago, you kind of have to take the conclusions with a little bit of a pinch of salt. They didn't have the technology that we have now, and they didn't even have good methodology often to excavate these places in a systematic way. Nevertheless, it's an odd accumulation of skulls at a Neanderthal site. We can say that, at least. Another interesting site is Teshik Tash in Uzbekistan. Whenever I've read about Teshik Tash, the main thing I took away from it was that it was very far east. Until Neanderthals at Denisova Cave were discovered, it was the furthest east Neanderthal site, and it sort of shattered that perception of Neanderthals as mainly confined to Western Europe. But there's really a lot going on there. Teshik Tash is a good contender for a Neanderthal burial. It was the resting place of a Neanderthal child who was probably between the ages of 8 and 11 when they died. Surrounding the child were 5 pairs of ibex horn cores, the bony core of their horn. The bony core of their horn. This is a funny thing to say. You can see some of them here in the reconstruction of this site. The horns just scattered around the burial. Now again, this site was excavated in 1938, so a lot of the same caveats apply. They didn't have amazing technology and didn't maybe have the best methodology to excavate these sites. But it is odd to potentially be buried next to 5 sets of horns. The museum in Uzbekistan interprets the burial this way, with the horns crisscrossing the body. Are they right? I'm not sure. But what I didn't realize before I started researching this video was that Teshik Tash means large holed stone in the Uzbek language. Look at this. Look at this thing. This is Teshik Tash. This is the rock formation right next to the cave. Did it look like this when Neanderthals lived there? I have absolutely no idea. But it kind of looks like horns to me. Isn't that interesting that a burial would be surrounded by horns and then outside of that burial are these horned-shaped rocks? Is that relevant in any way? I don't know. Probably not. Let's say probably not. It's just my simple ape brain making connections and recognizing patterns that aren't there in reality. Maybe. For anyone still unsure, still undecided about the symbolism going on in these brains, I want to go back to Spain one more time for just a fantastic site, which, in my opinion, is just absolutely clear evidence of symbolic thinking on the part of a Neanderthal. La Pasiega Cave is right in the north of Spain. There weren't any skulls or anything like that found here, but something much more creative, perhaps.
What we find here is evidence of Neanderthal painting, not only just smearing pigments on the wall, but actually painting something that is symbolic, that represents something.
These cave paintings are absolutely fantastic. This rectangular panel, the dots, this strange-looking thing, some sort of helicopter bird pirate, I don't know. These incredible cave paintings were dated to basically the same time as Cueva de Cubierta.
And the very question is, how old and when did this happen?
Normally, archaeologists would use a technique called radiocarbon dating, which dates the time that charcoal has been used to make paintings. But we can't do this with these kind of paintings because they're made out of mineral pigments. So instead, we're focusing on these tiny white crusts that have formed on top of the paintings. And they're made of calcium carbonate. And they're formed by the water percolating through the rocks. And they precipitate out calcite. If this calcite was precipitated on top of the painting must have been there for it to precipitate on top, which means the painting must be older than the age of the calcite.
The artwork is at least 64.8 thousand years old. So again, right in that ballpark where Neanderthals were putting skulls in that room in Madrid. Back to the time when there was no evidence of Homo sapiens in Europe. Someone, presumably a Neanderthal, had come into this cave and painted these things on the wall. Clear evidence of symbolic thought on the part of the Neanderthals. Was just absolutely mind-blowing to me, truly mind-blowing, is that inside these rectangular panels, you can see little drawings of animals. Now, we don't have any evidence of Neanderthals drawing animals or anything like that. That's something you tend to associate with Homo sapiens. There's a lot of famous cave art from the Paleolithic depicting animals. One hypothesis is that Neanderthals drew this rectangle and the bird pirate and these dots for whatever reason 64,000 years ago. 20,000 years later, when Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, they went into the cave, saw that same drawing, and added a little doodle of an animal. We can't say for sure that that's how this scene was constructed, but that's very possible, and that thought is just mind-blowing to me. That two people can participate in a work of art separated by 20,000 years. That's crazy. Regardless of who drew those little animals, though, these cave paintings clearly are evidence of symbolic thought on the part of a Neanderthal, and they date to the same time period as the skulls being assembled in Cueva de Cubierta. There's something going on in their brains, guys. They're not just bumbling around mindlessly consuming calories. These places, these animals, I think they meant something to these Neanderthals. What was going through the minds of these Neanderthals in Cueva de Cubierta when they placed all these horned animals in the room on nice rocks, on top of fires? We'll never truly know what goes on in someone else's brain, just like I don't know what's going on in your brain. Could it have been just simple consumption of calories, and for whatever reason, 35 times, they just happened to end up in that room with a skull? Maybe. But let's imagine for the moment the Neanderthals in that area did have certain beliefs around animal skulls, rituals connected to horned animals that they were gathering at a certain time and a certain place to commemorate an event or commemorate a hunt. Something like that. What evidence would that leave behind in the archaeological record? I think it would leave behind the kind of things we see at Cueva de Cubierta. Skulls with no other remains around, placed on tops of fires, placed on tops of nice rocks. A seemingly repeated pattern of behavior, 35 times, time after time, this process is happening. This is exactly the kind of evidence a Neanderthal ritual would leave behind. And as we uncover more evidence about Neanderthals and how they lived, and as we go forward and find more and more interesting and unique Neanderthal sites, I think the chances of this being some sort of ritual activity only grows. Think how much our opinion has changed on Neanderthals since that film in 1914. And now imagine what we'll know in another 100 years. It's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible. That's why I like calling this series Unknown at the Moment, because we're gonna get an idea of what was going on in these brains. Huge thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Check out the link below. See what your family was up to way back in time, as far back as 1740. And yeah, Neanderthal skull cults. To me, it's a no-brainer. But I'm sorry, I recorded the video without that joke, and I couldn't let it exist without that joke in there. I know, terrible, terrible. Thanks for watching.